Welcome, everyone, to week 2 of the Leadership Alliance Professional Development Workshop Series. My name is Dr. Taiese Bingham-Hickman. I'm the Executive Director of the Leadership Alliance, and I will be the moderator for today's event. This event is a component of the Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. The Leadership Alliance Executive Office and its partners created this initiative to ensure continuity of skill building, networking, and exposure to graduate programs for undergraduate and graduate students from across the country. Paired with our Wednesday evening workshop series, we hope to expose you to a discussion of critical issues, allow you to network with each other and our wonderful doctoral scholars, as well as develop a learning approach and skills for navigating your research careers. Today, I am pleased to introduce doctoral scholar, Dr. Malo Hutson. Dr. Hutson is the Dean and Edward E. Elson Professor at the University of Virginia School of Architecture, a nationally and internationally recognized expert in the areas of community development, climate resilience, environmental justice, and urban health. As a scholar, teacher, and practitioner, he focuses on the nexus of environmental, architectural, and urban equity practices. He is the recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the Salzburg Global Fellowship, 2 Mellon Fellowships, and a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Health and Scholar Fellowship, among others. He has served as tenured professor at the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at Columbia University, where he was a director of the Urban Planning Ph.D. program and the Urban Community and Health Equity Lab. He was also the director of project development for Columbia World Projects, a university-wide initiative that mobilizes researchers and scholars to work with governments, organizations, businesses, and communities to tackle global challenges. He served on the executive committee of the Earth Institute, Columbia's climate school. Hutson has also held academic leadership appointments at the University of California at Berkeley, serving as the Associate Director of the Institute of Urban and Regional Planning and the Chair of the Urban Studies Program. Dr. Hutson has worked nationally and internationally on community-centered projects that improve the economic, environmental, political, and social well-being of urban residents. His research and writing have been recognized by numerous awards and grants, and his most recent book, The Urban Struggle for Economic, Environmental, and Social Justice, Deepening Their Roots, explores the efforts by coalitions of residents, community leaders, unions, and others to resist displacement as a result of neighborhood change and gentrification. So thank you, Dr. Hutson, for joining us. That is quite the resume. And I am so looking forward to hearing about your work and all that you do. And I know that a number of the students that we have with us today are particularly interested in your area of research and also with all of the challenges that we face as a nation in terms of environment and climate and political issues. I think your research is just something that we all should be paying attention to right now. So with that, welcome. And I think I'm going to start with one of our student questions here, specifically around, what climate change initiatives do you think can be made specifically within architecture and community development work?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for having me. It's such a pleasure to be involved with the Leadership Alliance, and it really changed my life. So I wouldn't be where I am today were it not for the Leadership Alliance and all the wonderful mentors and friends and colleagues I've had along the way. If we think about climate change in architecture, there are many things that we can do. Oftentimes, I know we get overwhelmed, whether we're reading the newspaper or looking at the news and seeing what's happening globally, whether it be forest fires, floods, the degradation of our overall environment, issues around food systems and whatnot. It can be overwhelming. And so as we think about the work in architecture, landscape architecture, architectural history, or urban environmental planning, and other related professions, it's really about how we think about the overall built environment. So for architecture, for example, we think about biomaterials. Are there new ways to build that are much more sustainable, and thinking about those products? We think about the climate that we're building in, right? So if you are, say, in Florida, for example, we know that there's been an increase in the intensity of storms. We know that the amount of rain just coming down is incredibly in large amounts, whether we're talking about New York City or Florida or wherever, right? And so what we want to think about is how do we build in a way physically in terms of the actual overall environment, whether we're talking about housing, but also the infrastructure that goes with that. So thinking about the water channels and thinking about when rain does come or there's a lot of flooding or sea level rise, how do we channel that water elsewhere away from where people live and it doesn't just swallow you up? So in our curriculum and more broadly, we think about this from a holistic perspective, not only the actual built environment, housing, infrastructure, transportation, things I just discussed, but also the overall ecology of the environment. And so where do trees fit into this? So if you're talking about the heat wave effects that we see, whether it be in the major metropolitan areas of, say, a Phoenix or Dallas or Houston or New York, Chicago, lots have been documented and around the world, same issue is how do we think about urban forests? What role can that play in reducing the heat? What are the kind of surfaces that we use in terms of what we build? All of those make a big difference. And then I will just end that first question by really expanding about how we think about our work. So if you think about the urban and you think about the rural, it's actually oftentimes you'll see people talk about them as though they're these two separate things. But in fact, the way we think about it at UVA and many people that are in the leading edge around this, think about it as a continuum. So if you're talking about food systems, for example, you can't talk about food and access to food, whether we're talking about in urban environments, without thinking about a number of things of the labor, right? Gender, transportation, the actual farm workers themselves, the actual migrant workers, if we're talking about a place like California and elsewhere around the United States or even globally, all of that is tied into when you start thinking about our food system and thinking about climate and thinking about justice. They're all interrelated. So that's that way we think about this and try not to get overwhelmed, but actually just kind of center it in our own work. I know there's a long answer, but I just wanted to provide some context there.
No, that's great. And I think this is a great segue into this next question, because this question really encompasses all of those things that you just talked about. So this student asks or replies, in a class, they took a class on the political science of social movements, and they did an exercise where they imagined their futures and the world that they could potentially live in. So this question to you is, what is a future you envision, a scene of a neighborhood, a scene of a community that prioritizes racial, environmental equity, foods, practices, and support systems that gives you inspiration and strength to work towards that future? I mean, this is a very aspirational and deep question,
Love
but if
it. I
you
love
have
it.
the time to tackle it, we'd love to hear it.
Having all these great students in the Leadership Alliance, I love the question. And, you know, so I'll start with, I've done work around the world. I've been fortunate to go to different communities. And I think the most important thing as we think about futures or planning or all these things is understanding the local knowledge of the people themselves. What do they want from their own community? So I'll give you an example. I do a tremendous amount of work down in Chile, and it's about 3 hours south of Santiago and in the Malo region. So there's Talca and some other towns. And they've been hit by a number of issues. You know, obviously, earthquake happened in 2010. That was quite devastating and led to a whole bunch of disinvestment and challenges. Then there was the tsunami that followed that. Then they've had a number of forest fires. One of the forest fires was one of the largest in Chilean history a few years back. And now, unfortunately, that's been surpassed by some recent forest fires. But when people start thinking about rebuilding and what they want their community to look like, right, it's about engaging with local people. So in this context of Chile, if you think about the first responders, oftentimes they're women. They were the ones to find their neighbors who unfortunately had lost their lives in the fires. They were able to be the first ones to cook, to bring the community together, to do all these things. But unfortunately, the system itself, government was centralized. And so you had these government administrators coming down from Santiago, as well as the regional government, and then coming in to say, we know what's best, we're going to fix the community. And those are often men, right, in this particular case. And the women who were organizing locally said, no, we're going to do it differently this time. We have a vision of what we want our community to be like. We want to work with you on that, but we need to be at the table as equal partners. And so what ended up happening, and I'm telling you the nice story, right? It was a long struggle, big battle, wasn't always perfect. But what ended up happening was when they rebuilt the community, not only did they build it more sustainable, they modernized the homes. They had washers in the houses and dishwashers, things, or maybe not dishwasher, but certainly clothes washers and things like that, more modern amenities, because when we're doing all this work, we want houses that actually allow us to be able to spend more time with our children and to do other things that we're interested in. They built a brand new school. They built a childcare center. They built a health clinic. They brought in a fire station. They created a local business district. I mean, it was just quite phenomenal in terms of understanding what people had envisioned. And they thought about multi-generational living. And so the first pillar of doing any kind of work, I think, is engaging with the residents themselves, understanding that, yes, as a scholar, as someone who's been trained in this area for many, many years, I have a certain level of expertise or specialization, but what I don't have is that local knowledge unless it's my own particular community I've lived in for a number of years. And so you have to first start with where are people and be able to do that visioning process and understand how do you try to get there. Now, for myself personally, as I think about a community, what makes a community a great place? It's one that you're not separated from the way we live our lives, and you're not separated from nature. So what do I mean by that? I think communities that are incredibly strong are communities where you're able to interact with your neighbors. There are public spaces that you can come into contact with each other. I lived in the Bay Area and still have a home out in Berkeley, and I can tell you if you decide not to engage with certain people, you don't have to. You could take Uber, Lyft. If you work for Google or Silicon Valley, there's oftentimes buses that will just take you elsewhere. You don't have to take public transportation. You can live in a really nice enclave and don't have to deal with people. And that's a lot of places around the world. And I would argue that those places that are much more vibrant and lead to true conversation and understanding are places where you have connection with community. So obviously, first and foremost, you engage with community, but also you think about housing. Housing needs to be a human right, right? Housing must be guaranteed for everyone, good quality housing. One of the things I love about our design professions is that, yes, there are those that just build for the 1%, but good design should be accessible to everyone, right? And so can we build communities that are multi-generational? Can we build communities that think about our young people and supporting them around education, daycare, but not where it's separate, where you just go over to this building or that, but the community is actually integrated and you walk and you get to know your neighbors and you're not seeing the neighbor as the other, right? They're different than you, and that's fine, get to know them. Where you have accessibility to healthy food, where you have, and it's not that it's just a grocery store that might carry the great products that are organic, but do you have gardens in the community? Do you have bike pathways? Do you have places to walk? Do you have places to reflect and to think about your lives? Do you have places to have entertainment and art and culture so that all people can partake in those things? Now, that's, some might argue that's utopian, right? That's a utopian society, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to present an alternative to what oftentimes the environments many people grow up in. So like environments I grew up in weren't that, right? We oftentimes are exposed to environments with lots of violence and whatnot. And so we have to think about not only the essentials for people, housing, shelter in general, feeling safe, having access to quality education, being able to be walkable and healthy in all those ways, but we also think about all the other wraparound services or amenities that people want that improve people's lives. We know without a doubt, that investment in early childhood education pays off in so many ways. We know when people feel safe in their communities and know their neighbors and they're able to access nature, it helps with their mental health. We know these things, and COVID has just highlighted that even more to understand the importance of those things. So I would argue that a community that is holistic, a community that really takes in the voices of those residents who live there and thinking about future residents who may come. One that's not exclusive, but is actually inclusive is the kind of communities that I envision. And those are the kind of communities I've been trying to work with, in whether it be developers, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, to really try to create those environments.
That's amazing. And I'm also working on something similar. I founded a nonprofit called New England Equity Collective to help provide access to underserved populations, to provide access to housing,
Yes.
long-term housing and short-term housing. So I definitely understand the need and, how you described how a community should look and work together. I mean, yeah, that is the ideal. So I
Yes.
appreciate your insights. In building off of what you just mentioned, how do you maintain your alliance to the communities that you serve? So how do you keep the interest and well-being of your communities, either that you work with or that you live in mind through your work?
Yes. So, I'll be very personal with you all. My mom had me at 17 years old, and she wanted me to grow up and be able to make a difference. She talked about the decision she had made. We had lived in different communities. So I definitely come from humble beginnings. And one of the things that I was determined to do in my life was to make a difference, right? And um, so being an academic was never on my radar. Definitely not being a dean. I never wanted, I don't think any child who grows up says they want to be dean. If they do, they should probably have their head checked. But what happened was a real simple thing. One is my life and my work are not separate. I don't go and do my research and then go home and think about something else, right? I think about these things all the time. I am a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a community member. I think about these things all the time in my day-to-day life. I try to make decisions that are important. So I know for colleagues, depending on the discipline you're in, it's hard to stay connected, so to speak, oftentimes. So, you can see how if you're at a great institution or higher education, there's oftentimes a separation from the community, so to speak. Or even family members didn't understand what I was doing. Like, why are you in school for so long? Like, what do you do? Like, why don't you get a real job? Right? These were huge pressures, especially when there was a lot of pressure to have money to send home. There was pressure to go make money, but I knew that I was on the right path. And part of that was understanding my motivation to do what I do. I was doing it because I didn't wake up want to be a dean, as I just said. I wasn't motivated by some other promotion or could I take the first step and try to have some understanding of my environment, how I grew up? From there, from my undergraduate, I then said, obviously got to participate in Leadership Alliance and got to meet scholars in other fields and understanding like, oh, living in environments with lots of violence or not access to healthy food can impact one's health. That resonated with me because that's that I saw in my own communities. And so to go forward and not understand that and that not be a part of me, it just was never an issue, right? It's just who I am. And so my wife will even joke with you, and she knows that. Like I joke because she's like, "Oh, you're so busy, you do all this community work." Not so much now that I'm a dean. And I said, "Well, you know who you married," and that's why she loves me because she's very similar. And so I think we don't talk about values enough in our work. But whether you're on Wall Street, whether you're thinking about generative AI in Silicon Valley or Mumbai or wherever you might be, Bangalore, you have to have a value set. You have to think about why you do what you do. You think about all the great institutions you all represent or are participating in this summer and where you come from. Billions of dollars these institutions have, right? UVA, we're sitting on some 14, 15 billion dollars. Okay, so we know we need to educate the next generation of leaders. We need to do cutting edge research. We need to provide service. But I would argue there's a bigger mission of higher education. There's a bigger mission that we can all have ourselves is to really have a positive impact in the world, right? We look what's going on. I won't be overly political because you already know what's going on in the world. But you can have such an impact in the work that you do, whether you're dealing on working on cancer research, thinking about history, culture, identity, whether you're doing work in public health or engineering, it's all necessary. It's all necessary. And I would just say for me, it's just not forgetting where I come from and being connected. And so the best advice I got when I was at Berkeley, then going to MIT for my doctorate, then being a professor was get out of the institution itself and go into the community, right? So, when I was at Columbia, like, I mean, there's a huge challenges being in Morningside Heights in Harlem and all that, because it's not always connected. So you have to get out and do it. You have to go out and meet people who are part of the city. You have to go live it. You have to go be a part. And from there, it's not that separation because you don't have that disconnect. Sorry to go on and on, but I'm just trying to, I don't know everyone who's here, but I want to try to make sure I could reach as many people as possible in my answers. But that's
No, that's helpful. And I think that going back to that story that you told about Chile, how important it is to have representation from different voices and for those people to have a seat at the table, right? Because, the politicians aren't necessarily thinking about maybe rebuilding a daycare because they weren't living in that,
correct.
where that was a need for them. So I think that that's so important. And, to be connected to your work is something that, is fuel. So I think that was important to hear. Um, what do you think motivated and you talked a little bit about it, your family background, but in terms of your current profession, what do you think motivated you to choose this path?
Yeah.
And what are some factors that encouraged you to study urban science? I mean,
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
something that a lot of people know about unless you're kind of
Yes.
in the field or maybe someone tells you about it. But what made you make that leap?
A number of factors. So one, the lived experience, which I've talked a lot about already, but the other was having great mentors, right? So I think about the professors, the staff that I had a chance to meet during my early years of education, and them taking time out when I go to office hours to just tell me about how do they get into the work that they do. And I just became more and more interested in the kind of impact they were able to have, or at least have conversations with people who are decision makers. And so that started to motivate me more, right? To get to know people. And I always had an interest in understanding my environment and my world because I just knew it wasn't something was off, right? It's like, well, it is the way it is. You hear people say, like, it's not. When you think about your built environment, it is not that it just one day ended up this way. It's by design. Policies have been made, economic decisions have been made. Someone like me or some has made a decision that's led to either good or bad. Um, so it's not that you're just in it and it just happens. You have to be a part of it. And so for me, I understood that early on, growing up in the Los Angeles area, then going to school in the Bay Area, spending a lot of time in Oakland. And I saw a lot of people who looked like me who didn't have jobs. At a time, my economics professor was like, anyone can have a job. Silicon Valley is creating so many jobs. Unemployment's like 0%. It's like 2 or 3% at the time. And I was like, that's not like the people I see in Oakland. And so I just became super interested in why these disconnects existed, right? So having that mentorship, being intellectually curious, but then even getting to a point of realizing that you can actually have an impact, right? You can actually work to make a difference. Now, I struggled for a long time being an academic because sometimes I feel disconnected. And so I realized that I needed to find a profession that allowed me. So being in architecture, design, planning, we're a professional discipline, we're a professional school. So we have PhD program and all of that, but we're expected to go out and do things, right? Our faculty have firms. I have a firm. And so you're connected in the real world. And so I think that's really important to have theory and practice. I'm a strong believer in theory. I'm a strong believer in research. I'm a strong believer in higher education and the impact it could have. And so that keeps me going. And those are all the factors that played it. And there are many others, but I would say lived experience, mentorship is incredibly important. Mentorship. And I'm sorry for these long answers, but one of the things I would say with mentorship is you should have at least 3 mentors. A mentor in your profession, a mentor for you personally, and a mentor who's just outside your world. And let me tell you some funny stories. So when you're in your own world and you get riled up about things, you go talk to someone who has no connection to what you're talking about, and they humble you really quickly because they're like, Malo, I don't understand what the big deal is. Like, no one really cares about this issue. This is a really small issue. It's only a big issue because it's your world. And so, right, you need that balance of someone who's just sort of puts it in context, or maybe it is a big deal and they say, wow, that is a big deal, right? They can like, okay, there's that. Then you need someone, as a Black man who had a particular upbringing and an administrative role, especially today, I need someone I can go to and say, listen, I've got to talk to you about all these other things, right? And I have that mentor, and he's phenomenal. He's in a similar position, much higher up. But he's at Columbia University, and we keep in touch. And he just gives me this wisdom of like, yes, I deal with this too. You just have to think about the bigger picture. Or you deal with this microaggression. You talk about that. So there's that. And then there's someone in your profession who's just saying like, how do you think about the next move? And now I'm a dean, and I'm thinking like, okay, how do I'm making budgetary decisions, or I'm trying to hire faculty to do this, or I'm thinking about the next iteration of our work and how will generative AI impact the profession, right? You just need someone in that world also who can understand what you're doing. So I try to have three mentors, and that's also been extremely helpful in my work.
That's great advice. And we have a whole workshop on mentorship for students. I believe it's on our website under the mentoring page. So if you're curious to learn more from either Dr. Hutson or more from us, feel free to check that out. That's great advice. So here's another very good question from another student. And given your extensive experience in community development, climate resilience, and urban health, how do you envision the role of interdisciplinary collaboration in advancing sustainable urban environments? And what strategies would you recommend for effectively integrating diverse academic disciplines, local communities, and policymakers in the process? So another very big question.
Yeah,
I'm not
many
sure
layers.
you can tackle, but
Yes, I might come back to you, Dr. Hickman Bingham-Hickman to straighten some of these things out. So the first thing I would say, interdisciplinarity is incredibly important, right? So you think about your own discipline. I'll stick to the world I know quite well. If you're going to be an architect or urban environmental planner or landscape architect or architectural historian, you need to do that well, right? You have to understand the methods in your own discipline. You need to understand those things. But what really separates, I think, the next generation of real leaders, citizen leaders, people who are transformative in their careers and in their professions are those that understand their work vis-a-vis other colleagues' work. So for me, I talk frequently to colleagues in engineering and policy and law and business and public health and medicine because I understand how these things are interrelated. And let me walk you through what I mean by that. So I initially started out as community development. I wanted to understand, how do you transform a local environment? You're talking about someone from Los Angeles. We know what happened after the verdict around Rodney King, and you saw the disinvestment and all the issues with gangs. Okay, so you understand that part. But as you start to talk about community development, you can't suddenly not think about mental health, violence, early childhood education. And then as you continue on that path, you start thinking about one's health and you say, but why are people diabetic? Why are people dying early? Why are these other things? Oh, access to healthier food, being able to exercise, being afraid to go out and do these other things, being exposed to chemicals, because oftentimes these communities are adjacent to these toxic environments, right? So then you get into land use, and then you get into land use law, and then you get into policy making, and you get into, so it's being able to really understand the connections, and not saying you have to do it all, but I'm happy to say now, and I confidently say, I know who to pick up the phone and call when I'm working on a really complex issue, and I know who to call, right? I know I need to call an engineer on a particular issue. I know I need to call a colleague who's an anthropologist on a particular issue. I know I need to call in a clergy person because we're really dealing with something that's dealing much more about the history of the community and spirituality. Or I know I need to call in someone who deals with trauma, whether we're talking about gentrification or not, right? So it's deep when you get to the point where you're working on a project that I have numerous projects and the community doesn't hear you. They don't see that development you're talking about. They don't hear what you're trying to organize around because they're dealing with the trauma that's been in their communities for decades, right? The freeway that's come through the neighborhood, the houses that were torn down, the disinvestment that has happened, right? You have to be able to address those issues to get to the bigger vision of what a community wants to be or where it wants to go. All of that's really important. And so I would say interdisciplinarity is incredibly important as long as you also understand that you've got your methods down in your own profession and understand mixed methods. So that's a big part of it. The other is, how do you do that well? Well, it's to see beyond your own world. It means make friendships. And that's why I love Leadership Alliance. I mean, my friends from there are still my friends. They're doctors, they're engineers, they're highly successful in so many different fields, but you stay connected to them and have an understanding. You go to events that maybe are outside your world because you don't know, but then you go to the event and you say, wow, that really is transformative. As a dean, I love it because I'm able to actually look at our four departments and understand. So we have architecture, landscape architecture, architectural history, urban environmental planning, and a number of certificate programs, one in real estate, historic preservation, urban design. So when I look at things, I would say that we're a big part of a lot of the conversations happening. Not the only school, not the only disciplines, but whether you're talking about climate change, the unhoused, migratory patterns because of climate, or war and destruction, or I can go on, right? We are in that space. We're not the only ones in that space, but we need to understand how our disciplines relate to environmental sciences, how they relate to engineering, as I said before, and so many other disciplines. So I go to different events. And then, one of the things I know some of you have been interested in, like, how do you approach either colleagues in different disciplines or faculty in different disciplines? Just ask them about themselves. How did you end up where you are in? What are some of the biggest challenges that your discipline's grappling with? And you'll find there's a lot of overlap, or some of the challenges that they're dealing with are similar to some of the challenges you might be facing, or your discipline might be facing, and how you work together. So I spend a lot of time very close to the Dean of Engineering here at UVA, Jennifer West. She's just a phenomenal person, a great leader. And I spend time with her and we just hang out. And sometimes we talk about, gee, climate, this is a big issue, and how it's impacting their school's work, our school's work, the professions more broadly. So it's incredibly important. And I would say that as we move forward, the world is continually getting more and more complex. I was just in Ireland and I was in Dublin, and they had a number of Ukrainian refugees that are there, right? And so Ireland has been, for the most part, accepting the Ukrainians coming in, but there's nowhere to put them. They've been putting them in hotels, and that's starting to prove to be a pain point for people, because suddenly, and I know it's going to sound really trivial, but you have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes. Suddenly you had your wedding scheduled and now it's canceled or it's been moved because, well, the hotel's no longer honoring anything they've done before because they're taking, right? And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying it's great that Ireland's doing that, but now they're putting up tents because there aren't places to put Ukrainians anymore. And so people are saying, well, but I've got tents in downtown in the community. Like, that's not great for us either, right? And it's not great for them. It's not great for us. And so you can see that trying to do the right thing and being out there doing the right thing. So now they need people who can think outside of, okay, how do we think about building homes? And, as I was saying before, thinking about the materials and why is the cost of building so expensive? So are there other materials that we can build? Even if it's temporary housing, are there ways to do that, right? And so we have people experimenting with 3D printing, thinking about micro units, other things. They're not ideal for long term, but are there ways to address some of these issues? Or if there's been a major storm, or earthquake or something, can we house people quickly and not put them in tents or temporary refugee sites, or housing that 5-10 years from now they're still there, right? That's problematic. So it's incredibly important to be able to think outside the box and understand who to go to for help.
Thank you. Yes, we need to have an offline because I'm living this right now in my town. Actually, there are migrants that are
Yes,
not able to be housed, and so they're actually relocating them from the
yes,
airport, which is where they're living right now, to a prison facility that has been shut down. And so
right.
that just that alone is problematic. But
Absolutely.
it's only meant to be a temporary shelter. So anyway, I'm living this and it's
Yeah.
happening all over the place.
And I don't want to be negative here, but oftentimes those temporary shelters end up being many, many years, right? So whether we're talking about Syrian refugees going over to Jordan or to other places, or we're talking about Haitians during the earthquake, going back to what, 2010, and then being in temporary house, right? Just we know that we've got to do better, and it's incredibly challenging, but it's necessary, and we can't have generations of people living in these conditions, right? And so, yeah, anyway, another conversation to have. So,
Yes.
but this is why I'm
So
so confident with the students that are here today and listening, and that will watch this in the future. You can
absolutely.
make a difference.
These are the problem
You
solvers
can
that are
make a
with us.
difference. Yes.
Absolutely. So one of our student questions that came in was related to your work with the Obama administration. So
Yeah.
um, they'd like to know, what were some of the things that you learned or some takeaways from your participation on the White House Forum on Environmental Justice?
Yeah. So it was an interesting forum. So I wasn't in the administration, just to clarify, but I was invited to the White House to participate in the first ever Environmental Justice Summit. And we had a chance to meet all of the President Obama's cabinet secretaries and head of everything. And one of the things that became very clear, and so it's 2010, from a pure security perspective, thinking about Boston all the way around to the Gulf of Mexico to Texas, what happens with sea level rise, and you have to move 130 million people, right? And we're starting to see some of that now along our coastline, sea level rise, constant flooding. What does that do in terms of stability for an economy? What does that do for stability of communities? What does that do in terms of our food system? So it's really a holistic perspective of like thinking about issues around energy, the environment, movement, and migrations of people. I know we talk about migrants, we're just talking about migrants, but there's also serious climate migrants now. And I don't know if the world's paying as much attention as we should be, but that's increasing, right? More and more people are moving because of climate, and their areas are no longer habitable. And so those are the kind of conversations we were having. They were conversations that uh, maybe the rest of the world wasn't ready to have, but you have to have it internally, right? I had a similar set of conversations at the UN. Secretary General had invited me to a meeting, and some other colleagues, not just me, but small group of people. And it was the key climate scientists around the world, as well as many of the major banks, the World Bank, Latin American Development Bank, you name it, Asian American Development Bank, or the Asian Development Bank. And the issue was, if you look at the climate models, after a certain point, everything goes, it's chaos, right, in terms of climate, right? And we're close to that point now. What does that mean, right? And so one of the things that became very clear is that we have to think about our energy infrastructure and how we build that out. We need to think about our consumption. We need to think about regional planning and local land use planning. Those are four things that said we've got to do now. And because you think about the world, right? Yes, there's the Londons, there's the New Yorks, there's all the great cities, but it's really the smaller cities, the tens of thousands of small to medium-sized cities that most people live in or have come from, that are going to really move the needle on this, right? That's going to make the big difference. And just thinking about our energy system, our consumption, all those things are necessary. But you cannot, and I'll give you a perfect example in my own world. I can't be dean at the University of Virginia, sitting here in my nice office in Charlottesville, talking about climate and climate justice, which is one of our key priorities, and not understand that I have Southwest Virginia, not far from here, that has relied on a coal, that has been an incredibly poor community and has challenged. If I don't have an alternative for people, I can sit here and say, well, we've got to address climate issues. We've got to think about it. What about the people who need to eat now, who need to have jobs now, who have relied on coal industry and all these other, so what's the alternative, right? And so those are the kind of conversations that we were having, and that, obviously continue to have, because you have to be able to provide an alternative view. You have to be able to meet people where they are and understand where they're coming from, right? And so I cannot talk about these things here, or if I go to, all the places I travel to and have these conversations, without thinking about people in my own backyard, and thinking about the people in Global South who are dealing with so many issues. You have to be able to meet people where they are and speak in layman's terms and spend time with people to really understand their perspective. And there's just not enough of that, right? We don't do that enough for all kinds of reasons. And unfortunately, more and more political reasons divide us, push us further and further away. But I'll just end on this part of the question is, I've been fortunate to travel, and I've never gone to a community that said, I don't want an investment. I don't want safety. I don't want quality housing. I don't want great education for my children. I don't, not one community has said they don't. Every single community I go to wants those things. What they struggle with is being at the table when those decisions are being made. They want to be at the table. They don't want other people deciding these things for them, right? And so there is this tension between whether we're talking about the United States, the federal, state versus local, right? And so the question is, at the end of the day, what's the bigger vision that people have for themselves and their community? I would argue we're not that far apart when you actually talk to people about what they want. It's how we get there. And then a whole bunch of other things happen along the way with, I won't get into all that, but you understand. But on the most basic level, I've talked to people from all backgrounds, and almost never has anyone ever said disagreed on the basics. I would say probably never. So those are the kind of conversations we're trying to have.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, and also for sharing, some of the places and people that you've interacted with, in your professional life. I'm gonna ask maybe for you to share some words of wisdom or encouragement with the students that are with us today in terms of like, how important do you think it is or critical to have a seat at the table? So you just dropped a whole bunch of high profile names and top scientists and people that run World Bank and all of that. And so, coming from, your background, your beginnings, and being able to share your real world personal perspective, how important is it? And what would you say to the students out there who maybe don't see themselves in a
Yeah.
position like yours, or, don't know how to
Yeah.
get to that seat?
Yes.
What would you say or share with them?
Well, one is we're all human, right? And I know that people might carry big titles on it. We're all human. But one of the things I've been fortunate, when I was at Berkeley, I used to teach this large undergraduate course every year. I did that for about a decade. And one of the things I said to every single student in the class is, I can't tell you about your lived experience. I can't tell you about the things you've gone through in your life. Only you know, and only you can share that. So each one of you has something to contribute. Your voice matters. Some people are louder than others, but there are quiet people who make a big difference. There are people who go out and organize, and they make every single one of you that I'm talking to today can make a difference because you have your own lived experience. And it's important to be able to bring that to the table, right? You are able to speak on behalf of people that you've met. Sometimes it might be incredibly personal. It might be your neighborhood or your community or your parents or your siblings or someone who has faced some terrible inequities. You all know what those are, and you're even yourself, right? So you just have to try to be authentic and listen and try to learn every day and surround yourself around people who are always smarter than you. That's what I do. And like I have a team here that's just great. And just try to keep your mind open, but understand, I don't care what environment you're in, you have something to contribute. You have a different perspective. And which is why oftentimes when I'm teaching these big lecture classes, I try not to, ask these questions that everyone's like, oh, I agree, because not everyone agrees, right? And that's one of the best things with clickers now, that we know where people who's in the room, and they can anonymously vote on things or have opinions. But it's important to be able to try to see different perspectives, but understand that you have a voice. And I never, like I said, this is beyond my wildest dreams. I've been incredibly fortunate in my life. My grandfather was a major influence in my life. Didn't grow up with my father, but my grandfather was a major influence for me. And I think about what he went through. And even on my hardest days, it will never be as hard as my grandfather growing up in the Jim Crow South of Mississippi. Never will be as hard as that, ever, ever, ever. And here I am, a dean at the university founded by Thomas Jefferson, who thought of himself as an architect, and I'm dean of the School of Architecture. So you have a voice. Oftentimes that voice might be it might be stripped. People might try to strip it from you. People might try to discredit you. People might try to silence you. People might try to do all kinds of things to make sure that your voice is not heard. But you have to continue to move forward, surround yourself around people who support you, who love you, who care about you, who value you. And you have to have some belief in yourself, because if you are on that cutting edge and you are innovative, oftentimes there's not someone around you that sees things the way you see them, right? And so uh, I'm doing things that there's no way I would have believed this is true. Had you told me this, I would just like, that's not possible, right? Not that I wasn't confident, I was incredibly confident. It's just you have to be able to see it oftentimes before you can believe it.
Mhm.
And all I can say is that the Leadership Alliance provided that for me. I remember meeting Dr. Weiss and so many talented people that were just so influential. And I remember presenting at MIT. We had our symposia at MIT, and I remember a dean coming up to me from Princeton and said, "You ever think about coming to Princeton?" And I was like, it was an out of body experience. So I'm at MIT. I have a dean from Princeton talking to me about thinking about Princeton, like my presentation. And that's when, those little wins and victories are where you can start to, and little did I know I was going to end up going to MIT and get my PhD, right? Like, you just don't know how these things are going to work. I ended up living in Princeton for unrelated reasons, and spent lots of time at Princeton as a, with friends, but being at Columbia. So I would just say this to you all: you can do it. And more importantly, the world needs you. We need you because you have that lived experience. You see the world differently. And let's be honest, I mean, the world is scary. But there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity, and you're all well equipped to go out and make that difference. And you just have to put one foot in front of the other one, chop the wood in front of you. Sometimes it means you need to be in the library doing your research. You need to finish that paper. You need to do that lab work, and that lab experiment might not work out. Stick with it. Sometimes those failures lead to the big breakthroughs. I've had lots of failure in my life. You're just hearing the great stories I'm telling you because it's my story. I can tell it the way I want to tell it, right? But in all seriousness, lots of heartbreak, lots of disappointment. But at the end of the day, so many great things have happened for me. And it's not just because of me, but I've had people who really cared about me. I was able to surround myself around people who share similar values that I have, and they pick me up when I was down. I'm able to pick them up when they're down. And at the end of the day, you hopefully have more wins than losses.
And that's great advice. And I know we're nearing the end of our time, but and you mentioned it briefly, but can you just reflect a little bit about your experience with the Leadership Alliance and why you think, whether it be Leadership Alliance or other programs that are similar, are so impactful in terms of trying to make that decision to go to graduate school or make that
Yes. Yes.
commitment to research. So anything you want to share about your journey and the
Yes.
success of programs like this?
I think, it was just the amount of care. So first of all, your summer fellow classmates and friends that you're with, and you all will have your ups and downs with each other. But at the end of the day, you're gonna just learn so much from each other. I think about all the things I learned from my colleagues when I was there, and then the level of mentorship, the opportunity to do research, right? Just at such a young age to be able to engage in some of the world's leading research and answer some really challenging questions. Um, for me, it was just incredible. And having been at a place like Berkeley, and not a lot of Black students, and certainly a lot of Black men, to go across the country to Brown and to just be shown so much love and care, and I could be vulnerable and ask those questions like, well, how do you, no one in my family's going to grad school, so tell me, how do I apply? How do I write a statement of purpose? How do I think about my research agenda? And now, I laugh about that. And I remember being nervous at a 5-minute presentation. I thought, oh my gosh, it's so long. And now I give, hours long presentations. So it's just baby steps, but it was such a great experience. And then to go to the national meeting and see other colleagues and friends at other institutions and hear about their summer and what they're doing and meet wonderful people, it's transformative, right? And it's such a privilege to be a part of it. And when you're in it, it's stressful, and you have mentors that are asking you for a lot, and it's summer, and you could be doing other things. And some of you might have been in my situation where there's pressure at home, but you just stick with it. And I think it'll prove to be incredibly valuable for you. It changed my life for sure. It demystified all these institutions also. When I applied to graduate school and you start getting into these institutions, and then you could talk to the, right? You're not just like in awe. So when of course, I was so fortunate to get into MIT, but I had been there already. I had presented at MIT. I had like walked the grounds of MIT. I knew what it looked like. I knew what to expect. And so I could move on to the other questions of like, well, what's the funding package look like? Who's my mentor? What is the housing situation going to look like, right? Those are things that were really important. So
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I also did Leadership Alliance myself at NYU,
yes, yes,
where and I did an internship at Harvard as well. But I ended up at NYU for
love
grad
it.
school.
I
And I
spent
think,
lots of time at NYU doing the Leadership Alliance. Yes.
yeah. So I think a lot of it comes down to, fear of the unknown. And once you, like you said, walk the grounds and you feel comfortable there and you can see yourself in that space, that just makes
Yeah.
such a huge difference. So I would encourage the students that are on today, as part of this series, we are having virtual recruitment events, which are drop-in events with various grad schools, top-tier grad schools across the country. So if you're able to drop into some of those, hear about the programs, hear from, high-ranking administrators about the institution, and also, as Dr. Hutson mentioned, our national symposium for those of you that are coming. All of these schools will be there trying to recruit you. So, sometimes you don't think of it that way, but they're trying to recruit you. So, hopefully you're able to experience some of that. I want to thank again, Dr. Hutson, for all of the stories, for sharing, for your work, because I feel like this work is so important. It is at the intersection of, everything, as far as I feel like for humanity, it's so critical. And I wish that more people were paying attention to it and that more of our students would do this work. But we thank you for doing this work. Um, Dr. Hutson's book, if you all are interested, again, is The Urban Struggle for Economic, Environmental, and Social Justice. So you can learn all about it in his book. And also, he offered to share his contact. If you'd like to reach him, we will put his contact in the Google Classroom for all of you to reach out. We do have a few more minutes, so I will get to this one last question that came in through the Q&A from one of our students. And the question is, how did you get into global service? How do you manage shortening the distance between your overarching goals and the day-to-day activities?
Good question. So with the global part, one of my mentors said, get to know a case very well in your own backyard, right? So I started to do work across California and then Chicago and other places across the United States. And once I really got that down, there are opportunities that came my way to go do things abroad, right? To go to Colombia or to Chile or to the UK or, what have you, to go to sub-Saharan Africa and different places, go to the Middle East. And so it just kind of came organically. It wasn't something I sought out. I know some people are international scholars and that's their work already, but it was really the work I was already doing that led to that work. And then how do I balance the day to day is, at the end of the day, work's always going to be there, right? And you have to kind of model it for your colleagues. But I have a 10-year-old son and a soon-to-be 13-year-old daughter, so they're quite young. And I did start the deanship quite early for many deans. So I started at I just turned 50 this year, and I started as dean as 47. So it's quite young, and my children are quite young. So it's really important to me that I spend time with my family. So I am very strict about dropping my children off to school every day, and I'm pretty strict about picking them up. So I will go home and have dinner with my family, and then I'll take meetings if I need to. But you have to have that work-life balance, because you can't talk about equity and inclusion and all these things, and your colleagues see you just working all the time, and they're afraid to bring their children around. I bring my children they come into my office. I bring them to all kinds of things, and I can do that for a number of reasons. One, I do have male privilege for sure. When my daughter was born, I would never bring her to school at Berkeley, and all my colleagues were like, "Bring your daughter, bring your daughter." So it was a cute thing, right? And I remember my colleague brought her child in, and the rude comments that people made, I never forgot that, because I saw that double standard. And I just said, I never want to be that person. And so I'm all about family and community at the school. Um, I will cut a meeting off if I have to let my child. That's just who I am. And people, in the beginning, people are a little taken aback, like, but they respect it. So once you do it, they respect. They're like, oh, he's serious about his schedule. And you have to spend time with your family. You have to balance things. And if you don't have a family, work is great. Work is really important, but you have got to have other things besides just work. You've got to have your community that supports you. You have to get out and just engage with the world and stay connected. I'm sure, some of you have lots of texts from family asking, are you okay? Are you alive? I haven't heard from you. And that used to be me. And that used to be me. And it's just not worth it at the end if you're going to do all this great work, but also not have balance in your life. And I know it's easy for me to say that because where I am now, I have that ability to say that. But there are days you have to put in the work. We know that, but you also, for the mental health, for all your overall well-being, you have to be able to maintain relationships with people outside of work. It's not
Thank you.
easy. I'm not sitting here saying I'm great at it all the time. I'm not, like,
Yeah.
you
No,
have to be able to do
I
that.
appreciate you saying that. Probably some the universe is telling me I needed to hear that message right now, at least. So
I'm
thank
not judging. I'm just telling, yes, yes, just so you know, I'm not judging anyone. I'm just saying for me, yeah. No,
no,
we all have our
it's
challenges, believe me. Yes.
it's
Yeah.
important. And I think with that, we will end it there because we want to be respectful of people's schedules.
Yes.
So thank you all for joining us. Again, Dr. Hutson's information will be in the Google Classroom if you'd like to stay connected with him or you have follow-up questions. Again, Dr. Hutson, we thank you so much for your time and for your work, and we will be in touch with you soon.
Thank you so much. And for all the students, congratulations. I'm so proud of you. Keep doing it. I was where you were not that, well, a while ago now, but you could do it. And we're counting on you. So thank you.
Thank you.